Greetings, adventurer. Welcome to the Ocean County Library's 11th episode of Forge Your Imagination, a guide to immersive world-building podcast, a series that will point creative individuals in the right direction when attempting to create your own world. I'm your host, Tom, a world-building enthusiast and professional dungeon master with over 13 years of experience. In today's episode, I will be discussing the creation of independent realms and how they can connect to spice up your world. Now, without further ado, let's get this quest on a roll. Alright, so let's say that we have all this other world-building information complete. Your world is fully created and structured with a bunch of fun and unique details. Your audience will most likely be very engaged in the story and the universe you have created, and this is a great thing. And if your story takes place on Earth, then you likely won't have to create any more additional information. However, if you made your own world from scratch, then the audience might ask you how this world came into existence. See, for specific situations like that, you might want to do a bit of brainstorming and find out how this realm came into being. Your options for this would also vary depending on what genre you chose. For example, if it was a sci-fi world, then perhaps the planet itself was created on the back of one giant asteroid. Or another fun option for sci-fi is that the planet itself could have been created by its residents who built this metal planet from scratch. Although if we were in a high fantasy setting, then maybe the planet's formation is a bit different. Instead, you could use elements of magic and wonder to create the world itself, and then tie it into your world's history. For example, what if the world itself was created when a leakage of magic from other realms had gathered up in this location? So this random location in space, all of this raw arcana from the magic of other realms, had kept on piling up and condensing so densely until it officially gained a physical form. You could tie this into history as well of the planet and say that the people of your universe have strands and abilities of magic of the other realms. Not to mention, it would also be a wonderful reason to why your world's citizens have the highest aptitude for magic in all the realms. Or, another good example for a fictional world you adventurers have created to use is, a pantheon of gods. Let's say that one of these gods, a god of nature, had passed away. You could use this as the base of your universe. From this god's body sprouted a whole world, an ecosystem, that your citizens now live on. Now they revere and give thanks to the fallen god. With this narrative, it would be easy to also create, links to prominent figures, create historical events, and even holidays. The main thing I want you to keep in mind is that most places, even Earth, have their own history and lore behind its creation. Now, this lore doesn't always have to be super interesting or tie heavily into the world and narrative, or even be vocalized, but it's important for you as the creator to know. It'll help you as well to prevent unintentional continuity errors and give your universe a more enriched world to work with. Please keep in mind that you can still create your own history surrounding the creation of your world, even if you were to choose Earth. For this fictional narrative, you could include ways that magic flowed into our world. A lot of popular manhwa, manga, and anime use the power of dungeons to manifest magic into their fictional versions of Earth. That way they could still use the layout of Earth, but spice it up with fantasy and sci-fi elements. A dungeon is usually a brief connection into a different realm that is filled with deadly magical creatures and dangers lurking at every corner. In some forms of literature, these dungeons can be closed, and in others, they're just permanently present. But regardless of what you've chosen, they could be a useful element to bring in just a dash of magic into your world. I also technically use this parameter in my fictional universe of Solera. I wrote that in my world that there are many theories and hypotheses of how magic first came to be. However, the most plausible theory to the magical community is the narrative that magical beasts began spilling out of this dimensional rift called a dungeon. And when magic first touched our universe, due to these pesky magical creatures and monsters, the population immediately declined. The veil that protects the human world from magic It was stretched thin and overrun by the sheer number of monsters spilling into the earth. That's why even mortals could see these monsters from legends, folktales, and myths. The world was terrified and not strong enough to hold off such powerful creatures without the use of magic. And that's when the world began to shift, and higher powers beyond mortal means had seemingly bestowed powers upon selected individuals. From this setting, I created several different theories on how people gained magic, so that my players and my audience are able to make their own assumptions. Theory 1 was that magic was infused in the air, and that the strongest newborn babies were born able to withstand its might and become the world's first mages. Theory 2 was that being attacked by a magical creature was thought to trigger arcana to rise to the surface in mortals. Mages of the time thought that the strain of being touched by a magical creature would push its body to the limit, and the individual would either absorb a bit of the magic or be consumed by it. And my last and final theory I created was that due to starvation, mortals were forced to hunt and eat magical creatures, and this caused mortals to die, but those who had remained and survived became the first witches and warlocks of the times. I want to take some time and reiterate all of the fun monthly events that the Ocean County Library has to offer that you adventurers might enjoy. Please keep in mind that even if you listen to these episodes years after they're recorded, many of these programs will still be ongoing, and you might ask yourself, after all this time? Yes, you should always check our calendar of events to find a group near you. The Ocean County Library offers adult writers groups for creative writing at multiple branches. If this is something you're interested in adventure, please keep an eye out for a group near you. Not to mention, we offer fun programs for teens called Dungeons & Dragons for Teens. This is a wonderful experience for young adventurers. Players who are 13 to 18 can join an adventure in the wonderful world of Dungeons & Dragons. More information on exact dates and locations can be found on our website, theoceancountylibrary.org, under the calendar of events. Also located on our website, you can browse our numerous databases that could help you with your world building and storytelling. 2 databases in particular I would advise adventurers to look into would be Udemy and Universal Class. These databases have excellent courses for writers who would like to learn and polish their skills, as well as various other fascinating courses that you might be interested in. Now, adventurers, grab your anvil and hammer, because it's time to return to forging your imagination. Now, since I explained how dungeons work, let's go over some other ways you could connect your realm to other dimensions. To start, we want to think of a separate world that connects to our own realm that we have created. Is this a different universe that will be completely fleshed out, or is it just a simple world that we created to elevate our own? For example, you can make something very in-depth like Dungeons & Dragons does, where you connect the prime material plane with somewhere else, like the Feywilds. This seemingly parallel world is the origin of the Fey creatures, such as the Seelie and Unseelie Fey, Eldarin, Pixie, and Satyrs. In this realm, they have their own set of politics, rules, and regulations that differ from the prime material plane that most players play on. Or, if you wanted to do something very simple, you could just make it a realm that is normally impossible for other individuals to go to. A good example of this would be like how in my universe of Akijan, I connect it to where the fire and ice phoenixes come from, which is a land called Hitokoraki. This dimension, also known as the Land of Phoenixes, is a world that is uncomfortably split in half. One side is freezing temperatures where ice phoenixes seek refuge and hide away from the fire phoenixes, and the other side is a blazing fire and floor covered in molten magma. It is rumored that the fictional deities of my world created this specific realm in honor of Holwolf and Kwolf, which is the fire and ice gods when they were born. The natives of this land are fire and ice phoenixes, fire and ice elementals, and same with ancient dragons. People from this realm are born with an innate, rare burgundy color magic. So, Considering the temperatures are either incredibly hot or incredibly cold, it is impossible for normal people to survive these desolate landscapes. Therefore, this realm is, a nice element to connect to my high fantasy realm of Akijan, but it's not as if my players or audience would be able to experience that realm in close proximity or detail. That little bit of distance helps me from having to build too many details into that realm's history, nations, or heritage. It's also important to decide where this tether or portal to another realm is located. So, if you guys decided to use Earth as your starting point, then were to connect to the fiery hot side of Hitokoraki, then the portal cannot be found somewhere too densely populated or too cold. The most plausible area to create a tether would be somewhere hot and not easily seen, like that of an active volcano, or buried somewhere in the middle of the desert. Whereas if the realm you connected to was frozen and icy, then you would want to make the portal or gateway somewhere like the Antarctic. This will hopefully also allow you to spread out these tethered realms in different locations around your world's map. It could also be used as a reason to why these specific locations are so hot or cold. Or maybe you could say that the other realm spills out some of this magically induced weather and it overwhelms what the Earth naturally creates. I personally like to spread out my tethers to other universes across the map and connect them to places that are similar to where they live. This way, I can introduce new classifications of creatures, people, and culture into my world organically. Just like how in my universe of Akijan, the only connection to the Abyss, which is like my version of Tartarus, is found deep within the mines of the Yarnoth Empire that have been long abandoned because of how dangerous it is. Information like this adds exciting new possibilities for the audience to explore even after using everything that your world has available. It's not something absolutely necessary for every world builder, but it is something that I encourage you all to look into and, really decide whether it's for you and for the world that you're creating. If you do decide to tie in another fully fleshed out realm to your own, then I would encourage you to create prominent historical figures from both worlds, as well as powerful bloodlines like royalty that would make it possible to include a family tree. This will make the worlds seem more unique and also naturally provide some culture that will trickle out from both worlds. If you connected a world of magic to that of the Earth, then it could be a worthwhile investment to make real-world connections and references that'll tie into the world you're using. A good example for this would be if I used the famous name Charles Darwin, but said that he was actually a mage that came from another universe. This magical tether, we could say, in their realm, everyone knows of the name of the rune caster known as Charles Darwin. His knowledge of creatures and evolution are exquisite. His breakthroughs are so grand that the magical community itself has commissioned a new floating library filled with his books. In fact, it's because of him alone that the magical community has a tier list for when it comes to familiars. He created the tier list and its ups and downs while evaluating each creature. This way, it stays true to the history surrounding the Earth, but also adds a flair of fantasy and magic. Another good example would be like using someone like Beethoven. You could say that he was always a famous musician. However, after the accident, no one was able to see like he could. He could predict the future like no one else. He was also able to accurately, single-handedly help the magical community escape mortal danger, exposure, or end a war. Although it wasn't always like this. Now, you see, with this narrative, we could say that in the beginning, his skills as a musician were good, which drove people to ostracize him and envy him. That's why no one was able to predict who cursed him and stole away his hearing. But, to their dismay, only after he lost his hearing did he truly flourish. It's all because of that lost sense that he was able to enhance his sight and see in a new way, and see beyond. I think that the family tree would also be a solid element to invest in. As I mentioned before, the more detailed the family tree is, the more important they'll likely think that the characters you introduce are. This will help you narrow down your audience's interest in select families, as well as show why they are or are not important. So, if someone very important from a different realm were to show up, then naturally this realm's, version of nobility would try to accommodate them and roll out the red carpet, so to speak. You don't even have to mention the whole family tree unless it's important to you. Instead, you could just drop in specific names and some of their accomplishments as time goes on. I'll give you an example of a family tree I have created from my universe of Solera. I have created several families that are considered nobility in my universe that would have the presence to demand hospitality. One family would be the Merlin family. And as you could guess, this family is the descendants of the great and powerful wizard known as Merlin Ambrosius. As for the lineage of this family, it is long and tiring, so I focused on the last couple of generations. I typically go back 4 to 6 generations prior to the current timeline, which allows us to know who the current head of the noble family is, who their parents are, grandparents, children, and forefathers were. So, for the Merlin family, the oldest log that I have is from 4 generations ago. I kept track of each family member and the heads of each families, as well as other family members who were not chosen to lead, but were wed into other families. The same goes for if there were any tragic deaths that caused, someone to discontinue the bloodline. These details also helped me solidify which noble houses were connected. But that's everything I have to pass on to you all. Adventurers, I hope you enjoyed our journey together and that you have learned some valuable knowledge and skills. Just remember, creativity will live on and flourish even in the darkest sections of our minds. All you have to do is take hold of that creativity and forge it into something of your own desire. This is Thomas Stoll of the Ocean County Library signing out.
If you are hearing this message, you've officially listened to the entire episode, and for that, I'd like to thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please take a look over some of our other OCL Soundwaves podcasts. Feel free to leave us a rating on Spotify, Radio Public, and Pocket Casts. Most importantly, safe travels, adventurers.